night, I was fast asleep when I heard some strange noises coming from the kitchen downstairs. Thinking I might have a rabid squirrel or a rummaging raccoon, I armed myself with my iPhone flashlight and my slippers and I charged downstairs, only to find my 3-year-old daughter Kamya plopped in front of the pantry cupboard, her face all covered with melted chocolate. Kamya has earned the nickname Candy Queen because of her immense love for all forms of candy. As a behavioral scientist, I am always analyzing my children's behavior. I can't but be curious about all the interactions they have with things around them. I watch them all the time, even how they eat their cake and their chocolate. I noticed that when cake was lying out, Kamya nibbled more when the fork was on the left of the plate, and Sid, my son, nibbled more when the fork was on the right. Why, I wondered. Their behavior can probably be explained by the pictures of cake that you see here. Like Kamya and Sid, you're probably drawn more to one of these two forks. But which one? For those of you who are right-handed, I can bet it's the fork on the right side. That's because the fork on the left is too cumbersome to mentally pick up. Such is the power of mental imagery. In the mental imagery here, we don't just involve our visual sense, we involve our sense of movement. We imagine moving to pick up that fork. For the last 20 years, I have been working on multisensory imagery. I look at how people not just imagine pictures, but imagine sound, smell, touch, and taste. And then I look at how this imagery impacts their behavior. I want to tell you today how important this imagery is in our lives. We have non-conscious, multisensory interactions with the world around us all the time. We will have much more fun and enjoy the world more if we look into our own non-conscious, multisensory responses. In the mental experiment we just did, when the fork is towards our dominant hand, it automatically triggers an image of us picking it up and eating the cake. It's a visceral response. We just want it. This kind of mental imagery is very important in our lives as humans for making us more efficient. When we see the fork, we mentally pick it up. And then when we actually go to pick up the fork, our movement is much faster than it would have been had we not engaged in this mental imagery. We do the same kind of imagery when we turn a door, turn on a faucet, or put on our shoes. The imagery is also very realistic. Let's take soup as an example. Just as we cannot pick up a soup spoon with our right hand, if we are already holding a glass of water in our right hand, we also can't imagine it. Let's test it out. Try to imagine picking up that soup spoon. Now clench your right hand and then imagine picking it up. Is it more difficult? So what we see here is that mental imagery is very real, and that small changes in the placement of forks and spoons change how much we interact with them and how much we desire that cake. If advertisers want us to be tempted by their food, they should facilitate this mental imagery. In this ad, you can imagine picking up that spoon quite easily. But in this ad, Campbell has taken away the spoon. That's a mistake. Only a dog can mentally simulate eating that soup. And if you don't want to keep nibbling on that cake, take away that fork or put it towards your non-dominant hand. If there is no fork, it'll reduce your mental imagery and your desire for the cake. Reflecting on how mental imagery changes the propensity of people to engage with something caused me to create a new field of marketing I call sensory marketing. Sensory marketing suggests that products themselves speak to humans. Let's take the example of the Hershey Kiss. Hershey has made chocolate in slab form, but then it very cleverly converted the chocolate slab into the Hershey Kiss. Now, the Hershey Kiss is not a simple chocolate. The Hershey Kiss speaks to us. It says, "Unfurl me from my flag and unwrap me like a present. I am a bite-sized present just for you. You can put me on your tongue and twirl me around, and I will melt right there." There are no words and no written advertising. This is all done through multisensory imagery when we see the flag on top of the chocolate, hear the crinkle of the wrapper, and feel the chocolate melting on our fingers. And the mental interactions are not just with our hands, but with all our senses. Imagery makes life fun. Products that engage us in this kind of mental imagery also have other consequences. Unfortunately, businesses can charge more for them. But the good news is that when food engages us sensorially, our stomach gets full with a smaller quantity. So if the chocolate engages all our senses, we eat less of it. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's been shown by researchers Yann Cornell and Pierre Chandon. Another thing also happens, which is even more interesting. When food engages us sensorially, the taste also changes. So if the chocolate engages all our senses, engages our sound, smell, touch, and vision, and not just taste alone, the taste of that chocolate improves. This is also something I have shown in my lab. Note that people typically talk about visual imagery, imagining a scene, a picture, or a visual. We also call this seeing with the mind's eye. But can we hear with the mind's ear or smell with the mind's nose? I'm talking here about imagining smell, or what I call smellizing. I was still studying my daughter Kamya's behavior. I noticed that my little candy queen came running down the stairs when she could smell brownies baking. I wondered, would she also come running down if she could just imagine the smell? I had to put this to the test. Now, researchers have always wondered whether people can imagine smells. I could go to somebody and say, "Hey, can you imagine the smell of brownies?" But that won't be very reliable. So what I do instead is I look at whether behavioral consequences of imagining smell mimic those of real smell. We know that people salivate when they smell food. Will they also salivate when they imagine the smell of food and salivate to the same degree? For this, I needed to measure people's salivation. I divided my test subjects into 3 groups. All 3 groups saw this picture of brownies. But I had one group given the real smell of brownies. I made one group imagine the smell of brownies, and the third group did neither. What I found was that the group that imagined the smell of brownies salivated to the same extent as the people who got the real smell of brownies. That's the blue and the green bars here. And these 2 groups salivated significantly more than the group that did neither imagined the smell nor smelled the real smell. That's the orange bar here. The difference was 0.4 grams. That means the group that imagined the smell salivated 8 drops more than the group that didn't imagine the smell. Can you picture 8 drops of saliva coming down a person's mouth? That's a lot of saliva. But in all seriousness, what this experiment shows is that indeed people can imagine smells, and that behavioral consequences of imagining smell mimic those of real smell. This experiment and the findings from this experiment have implications for restaurants trying to sell food online during the pandemic. If they ask their customers to imagine the smells, their customers would long for that food more. Of course, if you're hefty trash bags, you don't want people to imagine the smell of the product. I could also include real smells in ads. Take this ad, for instance. This ad came out in Rolling Stone magazine in August 2016. It's for the TV show Weeds. It has a scent strip on the side, and the scent strip has the smell of weed. Can you imagine drug scents in magazines? But this scent is supposed to make people remember to see the TV show. Now, if I wanted to sell a weed brownie, I could have a similar ad with the smell of weed on the side and then hope that people would salivate more for my brownie and desire it more. That is one experiment I did not try with my children. People always say that we shouldn't play with our food. But I have found in my research that playing with food makes the experience much more enjoyable. Just putting a fork or a spoon next to the food makes us long much more for it. Turning a chocolate slab into a Hershey Kiss makes us fall in love with the chocolate because it involves all our senses. And asking us to imagine the smell of brownies literally makes us salivate more for it. Learning about sensory imagery has changed my life. I find much more pleasure in all my experiences, including my eating experiences. I have taught companies how to make inanimate objects talk to us all, and I have learned how vital the senses are to my moods and behavior. I would encourage all of you to focus more on your senses. You can begin the way I did and play with your food or your children's food a bit more. Thank you.